There comes a moment, quiet, almost sacred, when a man sees the curve of her smile, hears the softness in her voice, and feels something ancient rise inside him. A pull not toward lust or love, but toward purpose, as if her attention has unlocked a hidden script in his soul that whispers, serve her, protect her, devote yourself entirely to her. He doesn't question it, he moves with it, and before he even knows what he's doing, he starts to give. A man meets a woman, and something in her softness, her smile, or maybe the curve of her voice makes him feel chosen. She laughs at his jokes. She looks impressed when he speaks. He thinks she sees him. He thinks he's found the one. And without knowing it, he steps onto a path millions of men have walked before. The path of service. He brings her gifts, cancels plans to make time for her, listens to every detail of her day. He's proud of his devotion. He thinks this is what makes him a good man. And at first, it works. She responds, she smiles, she leans in. But slowly, almost invisibly, something changes. She stops texting back as quickly. Her touch feels colder. Her eyes drift more often. And the man is left wondering, what did I do wrong? But here's the brutal truth. He didn't do anything wrong. He did exactly what he was trained to do. He worshipped her. He served her. And in doing so, he became invisible. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this long before modern psychology ever put words to it. He didn't sugarcoat it with romance or optimism. He saw it for what it was, a delusion men are conditioned to believe, that serving a woman will make her love him, that pleasing her will earn her loyalty, that obedience will unlock affection. But Schopenhauer saw the lie beneath all of it. He once wrote that women's love is not unconditional. It's instinctual, biological, responsive to strength, not sacrifice. And yet, society trains men to become servants, to offer themselves up like gifts to be opened and praised. But a woman doesn't fall for a gift. She falls for gravity, for presence, for weight. And a man who treats her like a princess removes all the tension she needs to feel desire. You see, desire lives in contrast, polarity, tension between mystery and revelation. When a man gives himself away too quickly, too fully, he becomes known. Too soon, he removes the unknown, and with it, he kills the attraction. It's not cruelty. It's not her fault. It's nature. And here's where the puzzle comes in. Schopenhauer wasn't telling men to be cold. He was telling them to be observant, to recognize that a woman's heart isn't won through gifts or poems, but through understanding, through seeing the pattern, not just the performance. A man must learn to watch, not worship, to decode, not submit, because she is not a princess. She's a puzzle, and the moment you place her on a pedestal, you stop seeing her clearly. You start reacting instead of observing. You become the actor. She becomes the audience. And when the show ends, you'll be the one wondering why the applause never came. That's how the worship trap works. It flatters you while it empties you. But if you can step back, if you can see her not as a goddess to serve, but as a mystery to understand, then something shifts. You stop chasing, and you start solving. And in that moment, she stops losing interest and starts wondering who you really are. There's a reason Schopenhauer's words make people uncomfortable. Not because they're cruel, but because they expose the parts of human nature we'd rather keep buried. The ones that don't fit the modern fairy tales we're told to believe about love, goodness, or women. Most people quote Schopenhauer to sound provocative, to grab attention with his bitterness. But very few actually understand what he was trying to say. He wasn't attacking women to be edgy. He was dissecting the illusion that most men build their lives around. The illusion that love is pure, that women are gentle, and that devotion earns affection. His work wasn't romantic, it was surgical. He wrote that women are governed not by reason but by instinct, not by logic but by mood, biology, and emotion. To him, men fail not because they're weak, but because they project their inner fantasies onto a reality that doesn't match. They turn women into symbols of salvation, and then suffer when those symbols don't behave the way they imagined. Schopenhauer didn't hate women, he hated illusion, especially the illusion that tells a man that if he just behaves perfectly, if he's kind, attentive, respectful, then a woman will love him endlessly. That's the lie, what he tore down, piece by piece. In one of his most striking essays, he said women are not drawn to goodness, they're drawn to power. Not always the kind of power men expect, like money or muscles, but inner power, certainty, presence, the calm confidence of a man who isn't trying to please. And this is where most men lose themselves. They think service is strength, they think submission is love, but what they call love, Schopenhauer called enslavement. Imagine a man who constantly asks for reassurance, who checks her mood before he speaks, who adjusts his opinions to avoid conflict, who apologizes just to keep the peace. That man believes he's keeping the relationship alive, but in reality, he's draining the very attraction that once brought her to him. He has turned himself into a mirror, reflecting back whatever he thinks she wants to see. But she doesn't want a mirror. She wants a man. Schopenhauer believed that a woman's nature, especially in romance, isn't noble or idealistic. It's survival-based, evolutionary. When a man doesn't understand that, he becomes prey. He starts reacting instead of leading. He starts guessing instead of knowing. And eventually, he loses her respect, even if she doesn't know why. That's what Schopenhauer really meant. He wasn't telling men to dominate. He was telling them to wake up, to stop being actors in a play they didn't write, to stop pretending that self-sacrifice is the path to love, because it's not. He believed that clarity is the only cure for suffering, that to end delusion, a man has to strip away the fantasy, not just about women, but about himself. Why he serves, why he chases, why he can't walk away. You think she left because you weren't good enough, but Schopenhauer would say she left because you were trying to be, and she could feel it. Women always can. There's a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when a man realizes she doesn't respond to logic, to explanations, to fairness or reason the way he thought she would. And in that moment, he either becomes frustrated and reactive, or he begins to understand that she isn't meant to be solved like a math problem, but like a puzzle with moving pieces, hidden patterns, and instincts that don't follow the rules he was taught. This is where most men fail, not because they're weak, but because they expect consistency. They expect her to stay soft if they're kind, stay loyal if they're devoted, stay close if they're available. But a puzzle doesn't work like that. It doesn't reward effort, it rewards insight. Schopenhauer saw this with brutal clarity. He knew that women are not puzzles because they're deceptive. They're puzzles because they're complex, because their actions are shaped by emotion, by biology, by unconscious forces that even they don't always understand. And when a man tries to engage her with reason, to fix the relationship with logic, or to demand emotional stability, he ends up lost. Not because he's wrong, but because he's playing the wrong game. Think of the man who's always asking questions. What's wrong? Did I upset you? How can I fix it? He's attentive, he's sincere, but he's also ineffective because he doesn't see the deeper pattern. He doesn't realize he's reacting to her surface when the real problem lives underneath. And Schopenhauer's message to him would be simple. Stop asking. Start seeing. A puzzle invites attention, not panic. It requires patience, stillness, curiosity. And that's what women feel when they're around a man who understands this principle. He doesn't rush to solve every emotional storm. He doesn't chase every shift in mood. He watches, not with coldness, but with clarity. And she feels it. She feels his restraint, his presence, his quiet refusal to be pulled out of himself. That's what draws her in, not his reactions, but his frame, his ability to hold himself steady when she moves. Because in that stillness, she feels something rare, safety without control, intimacy without submission. And that feeling makes her open up, not because she's being pleased, but because she's being seen. Schopenhauer understood that most men are too noisy to see anything, too eager, too emotional, too desperate for validation. But the man who steps back, who stops trying to impress her and starts observing her, that man learns the real puzzle. And once he sees the pattern, he's no longer afraid of it. He doesn't take it personally. He doesn't try to fix it. He simply reads the signs and decides what to do. That's the difference. One man performs, the other perceives. And the one who perceives doesn't need to be told what's coming. He already sees it unfolding. She doesn't even need to say it. Her patterns speak louder than her words. You want to know the truth? She never needed you to serve her. She needed you to understand her. And that begins not with devotion, but with observation. It's a harsh truth most men don't discover until it's too late, that the very things they were taught would make her love them deeper, stay longer, and want them more, are often the same things that quietly kill her desire, her respect, and eventually her presence. You see it everywhere. The man who texts back instantly, who cancels plans when she calls, who showers her with praise even when she pulls away, who becomes a yes man, not out of weakness, but out of hope. The hope that by being agreeable, by being easy, by being available, he'll finally be enough. But desire doesn't live where there's ease. It lives where there's tension, where there's a pulse of uncertainty, a sense of weight. The more he gives in without being asked, the less she feels, and she won't even understand why. All she'll know is something's missing, and she'll start to look elsewhere for the edge he buried under his performance. Schopenhauer saw this long before modern dating coaches tried to name it. He didn't use terms like alpha or beta. He just saw what most men refuse to admit, that worship creates distance. That when you treat her like a queen without ever being a king, she forgets why she ever wanted you in the first place. Because the truth is, when a man tries to earn her desire through obedience, he's no longer a man, he's an employee. He doesn't offer polarity, he offers compliance. And compliance feels safe, but never seductive. Imagine this. A man is in love with a woman who keeps testing him. She pulls away emotionally. She grows cold. He responds by doubling his effort. He buys gifts, writes long texts, apologizes for things he didn't do, all in the name of saving the relationship. But every move he makes digs the hole deeper. Not because he's cruel, but because he's confused. He thinks being good will change her mind. But she's not responding to goodness. She's responding to energy, to mystery, to contrast. And he's given all of that away. Schopenhauer would say he's suffering because he mistook love for transaction. Because no matter how noble a man's intentions, when his actions come from fear, fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear of not being chosen, she feels it. And that fear repels her more than any mistake ever could. You think being reliable makes her stay, but Schopenhauer would argue it's being real that keeps her watching. Being grounded, being present, and sometimes being willing to say no. Because desire doesn't bloom in the presence of obedience. It blooms in the presence of strength. Not dominance, not aggression. Just a man who knows who he is and refuses to abandon it for anyone, especially her. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. That's power. And that's what she feels when you stop trying to serve her and start learning to hold your ground. Not to win her back, but to stop losing yourself. There's a shift, invisible to others, but undeniable to a man who's felt the burn of losing himself. When he no longer needs her affection to feel like he matters. When her silence doesn't create panic, and her attention doesn't create euphoria. When he finally sees her clearly, not through the eyes of a starving boy, but through the presence of a man who no longer begs to be fed. That's the beginning of detachment. And Schopenhauer saw it as the only true defense against suffering. Because as long as you chase the illusion, you suffer its collapse. As long as you let her reactions define your value, you're not in love, you're in bondage. Detachment doesn't mean withdrawal. It doesn't mean coldness or cruelty. It means clarity. It means you see her for what she is, human, emotional, unpredictable. And you don't flinch. You don't react to every storm. You don't need every question answered, every mood explained. You stop needing her to behave a certain way so you can feel stable. And when you stop needing her, you start seeing her. Most men think attention equals affection, that if she smiles, she loves him. If she pulls away, he must fix something. But that kind of thinking makes you her mirror, not her man. You're constantly adjusting yourself based on her reflection. And the more you adjust, the less of you there is to see, until all that's left is a version of you that exists only for her comfort. Schopenhauer warned against this trap. He believed that the man who lives through others, who builds his sense of self through approval, praise, or closeness, is always one step away from collapse. Because women are not stable foundations. They're weather. They shift and they test. They move with feeling. And a man who doesn't understand that will drown every time the tide turns. But the man who is detached, not disconnected, just rooted, doesn't drown. He floats. He watches the waves. He lets them crash without letting them carry him away. That man doesn't seek control. He seeks understanding. And that understanding is what makes him calm, even when she's chaotic. Imagine a woman pulling away. Most men lean in. They ask, they chase, they plead. But the man who's mastered detachment doesn't chase, he observes. He pays attention to the pattern, not the drama. He doesn't fight to fix it. He doesn't demand answers. He lets silence speak, and that silence becomes power. Because nothing unsettles a woman more than a man who doesn't need her affection to stay composed. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's anchored in something deeper than her moods. Himself. Schopenhauer would call that wisdom. Not indifference, but maturity. Not apathy, but mastery. A man who solves her is a man who sees her without flinching, who watches the waves without drowning in them. And when she feels that stillness in him, the quiet weight of someone who cannot be moved by approval or rejection, something shifts in her too. Not because he forced it, but because she knows. She's finally met a man who can't be lost, because he's no longer searching. There comes a moment, rare but irreversible, when a man who once bent, nodded, performed, and waited finally sees the entire game for what it is. Not because someone explained it to him, but because he lived through enough illusions to watch them collapse one by one. And what's left is no longer confusion, but sight. He sees that she never betrayed him. She simply lost interest in the role he was auditioning for. He sees that his suffering didn't come from her decisions, but from his own belief that he needed to become something in order to be chosen. He sees that every time he was rejected, it wasn't because he wasn't enough. It was because he wasn't himself. This is the moment a man moves from puppet to player, from servant to sovereign. And it's not loud, it's not angry, it's still, quiet, certain. It's the kind of shift that doesn't require revenge or validation or applause, just freedom. Schopenhauer wrote about this kind of freedom, the internal kind, the kind that doesn't come from power or attention or conquest, but from truth, from seeing reality without the filter of fantasy, from no longer mistaking projection for love or submission for strength. And in that clarity, a man stops asking for a script. He starts writing his own. Because when you're no longer playing a role, you start seeing who's still trying to hand you one. And you'll see it everywhere, especially in women who don't know their own desires. They'll try to fit you into their fantasy. The savior, the nice guy, the rebel, the silent protector. But when you don't step into the part, they'll feel lost. Not because you failed them, but because you refused to betray yourself. That's what Schopenhauer was trying to teach. That self-betrayal is the root of all masculine misery. That a man becomes weak, not when he loses a woman, but when he loses his form trying to keep her. You were never supposed to be someone else's idea of a man. You were supposed to become the kind of man who needs no idea at all, who simply is. A man who leads not because he demands control, but because his presence creates gravity. A man who listens not to please, but to understand. A man who gives without needing to be thanked, and walks away without needing to be missed. And ironically, that's the man she can't forget. Not because he performed for her, but because he didn't. Because he stood where others bent. Because he watched where others chased. Because he left when the role stopped serving him. When a man chooses himself, truly chooses, he becomes untouchable. Not unreachable, not emotionally dead, not arrogant. Just real, clean, rooted, no script, no desperation, no illusion. Schopenhauer's warning wasn't bitter, it was compassionate. He saw the pain men carry when they trade their truth for connection. And he offered a different path, not of war against women, but of awakening inside yourself. Because the puzzle was never about her, it was always about you. If this struck something deep, don't scroll. Like, subscribe, and send this to a man who needs to wake up.